James is going to continue along this same theme of how we have relationships with other people, and he's going to look at this idea of being resolved in wisdom. It seems like an interesting thing, and in looking at this sermon, I think we are a people, humanity is a people who want advice on how to have good relationships. Anybody ever Googled relationship advice? You ever done that? Really, John, that's good. Did you learn anything? That's good. Send that to Tommy because he might need a little bit of it. Google is a liar. I'm going to get into that. But if you Google relationship advice, if you Google that phrase, relationship advice, there are millions of hits that you will get off of that one phrase. You can scroll all day and look at different websites based on relationship advice. If you go into Amazon and you just type relationship advice into Amazon, there are 40,000 books that you could purchase on relationship advice. If you just scroll through and look, there are 40,000 options for you to get some good relationship advice from Amazon. There's a Reddit page, which I said that, and half of this room has no clue what I'm even talking about. But there is a Reddit page, which is basically like a blog app website. It doesn't matter. Don't go on there. It's not a great website. But they have categories about all sorts of things that you can discuss. And there is a Reddit page called Relationship Advice that has 25.5 million subscribers. So to this one page, there are 25 million people that have followed this relationship advice page on Reddit. And that's just a bunch of yahoos that are writing online, hey, this is good advice, right? We are looking for relationship advice. As a people, we want to know how to have good relationships with our spouses. We want to know how to have good relationships with our parents or with our children. We want to know how to have good relationships with our siblings. We want to know how to have good relationships with our coworkers or with our friends. Relationship advice is something that we crave. But there's a lot of relationship advice out there. So how do we know what to listen to? One of the things that we did at my wedding, and actually probably many of you did this at my wedding, but we had a little jar that we had set out at the wedding. And so as you came in, we had note cards, and you could write down your best piece of relationship advice. And then you could put it in the jar, and then Robin and I could read those at our convenience. And so what we decided was we received the jar, and then we took it back to our apartment, and we stored it for a year. And so we read all of the advice, and then we stored the advice and stored it for a year. And on our 1-year anniversary, I remember taking that jar down and pulling that advice out and seeing which things have helped us throughout the year and which things weren't so helpful. And so the 3 pieces of relationship advice, even today, that have stuck with me are this. One of them was go to bed at the same time. Don't one of you go to bed at 7 and the other one go to bed at 10, because that is a recipe for disaster. That it gets you kind of out of sync with one another, that you're not doing things the same way. And so Robin and I, to this day, will go to bed at the same time. Now, I go to sleep, if we go to bed at 10, I go to sleep at 10:01, and Robin might go to sleep at 10:45. But we go to bed at the same time, lights out at the same time. That was one piece of advice that seemed really good to me at the time that we still practice. Another one was, and you have probably received this bit of information, this bit of relationship advice, don't go to bed angry. Anybody ever told you that? The idea is that the longer that you allow that anger to fester, the worse that it gets. And so if I go to bed angry, then I have this habit of waking up angry, and then by the end of the day, the next day, that we're fighting about something that we weren't even fighting about yesterday, right? That if we would have just resolved that when we went to bed, that would have been the end of it, right? So that was a good piece of relationship advice, I thought. The final bit of relationship advice that I really thought was beneficial was this idea that Robin and I are a team. That it's not me versus Robin. Even in an argument, it's not me versus Robin. It's Robin and I versus the world. So if there's something in our relationship that's coming up, the two of us need to address that piece as a team, and then go about it, not as individuals or not as me versus her, but as us as a team. And so those bits of relationship advice were really, really good for me. Now, in looking online, I saw a lot of other relationship advice that was not very good, I wouldn't think. A lot of the relationship advice I saw online, John, was do what's best for you. If your heart feels good, do it. And if your heart no longer feels good, it's not for you. Basically, all of the advice that I saw online was you've got to look out for number one. You've got to do what's best for you. If you're in love with someone, great. If you feel in love, great. But when that relationship stops benefiting you, then it's time to cut it off and move on. Over and over and over online, that was the advice that I saw. And what's interesting is James is going to directly contrast these two bits of wisdom as it relates to relationships. The wisdom that has been beneficial for my marriage is wisdom that takes me out of the center of the solution. That it looks at a selfless way of looking at our relationship so that it's not what's good for me, it's that what's good for our marriage. And James is going to key on that. So let's look at James chapter 3, and we're going to start in verse 13. James chapter 3, and starting in verse 13, it says, "Who among you is wise and understanding? By his good conduct he should know that his works are done in gentleness that comes from wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart, don't boast and deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For where there is envy and selfish ambition, there is disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, and then peace-loving, gentle, compliant, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering, without pretense. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who cultivate peace." Now, this is an interesting passage, at least it was for me in preparing it. And to be honest with you, I had a hard time kind of figuring out how I wanted to teach this piece. It seems like James is running in this vein of how to relate to other people. And so he says, control your tongue. And then he weirdly shifts gears and starts talking about wisdom. And then he shifts gears again in chapter 4 and starts talking about how you're to relate to other people in the church and how there's envy and strife among you and how you shouldn't be arguing all of these things. And so it seems at its surface that this wisdom piece is kind of out of what he's trying to accomplish. It's out of the norm of what James is trying to accomplish. But to me, what he's doing, this is really clever. What he's doing is he's painting a broad picture from the way that you talk to other people and about other people to the way that you actually interact with them of how to have this understanding, this wisdom in relationships. That we're called to be resolved in our wisdom. That we're called to be resolved in our relationships. And so he starts this passage by telling you that your wisdom is actually evident in the conduct of your life. Verse 13, "For who among you is wise and understanding? By his good conduct he should show that his works are done in the gentleness that comes from wisdom." James, I don't know if you've caught this theme, but James has really cared about the way that you present yourself to the world. That your conduct, the way of living, your way of life, it paints a picture of what's on the inside of your body, what's on the inside of your heart. That this wisdom, and what he says is if one is wise, if you're practicing wisdom, that will show itself in your conduct. Paul uses this phrase, this word conduct, in Ephesians 4:22. He says, "Take off your former way of life, the old self that is corrupted by the deceitful desires, and be renewed in the spirits of your mind, and put on the new self, the one created according to God's likeness in righteousness and purity of truth." Paul translates that same word conduct as way of life, way of living. And so for Paul in Ephesians, what he's saying is, hey, you used to act a certain way. You used to conduct your life a certain way. Before you met Jesus, you used to have a certain conduct about you. But Paul says to take off, it's like taking off a coat. I did that sermon actually several weeks ago. Take off this old way of living and put on the new life that's in Christ. That your conduct should reflect the change of character that you have in following Jesus. That we're called to take off the old way of living and put on the new way. James is saying the same thing. He says, if any of you has wisdom, let him conduct himself in a manner that demonstrates that. The litmus test of our life as Christians is our conduct. The way that people can tell who we are and what we believe is by the way that we conduct our lives in the world. And so then what James does is he paints a picture of two different types of wisdom. One type is an earthly type, and he says that earthly type doesn't come from above, it comes from below. It is unspiritual and it is demonic. And he says that there's a heavenly type of wisdom that does all of these things, but ultimately that it is a peace-sowing, a peace-making, a peace-producing type of wisdom. And so what James is going to do is he's going to compare and contrast these two types of wisdom. So first of all, earthly wisdom is self-seeking. Earthly wisdom is self-seeking. Verse 14. But if you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart, don't boast and deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from the earth, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. What James is saying is this idea of wisdom, which is is full of bitter envy and selfish ambition, is not from God. That this way of desiring relationships that's full of envy, what other people have, I want. I'm frustrated that you have a job that I don't have, a position that I don't have, money that I don't have, status that I don't have, power that I don't have, all of these things, full of bitter envy and selfish ambition. If I could just get those things, then finally I would be happy. Finally I would be better than you, right? And so what James is saying is this type of wisdom is not from God. In fact, that is the wisdom that the world produces. This word wisdom in Greek is the word Sophia. But in Hebrew, it is a word called hakama. And it literally translates into English as restraint from acting in an evil manner. When we look at wisdom in the Old Testament, wisdom in the Old Testament is defined by this idea of restraint in acting from an evil manner. That literally, in order to walk in wisdom, I'm going to control myself in the way that I am behaved. That is wisdom in the Old Testament. And what James is saying is this wisdom that's full of bitter envy and selfish ambition is not from God. That's what the world preaches, right? Just, again, go online, look at the internet, look and see what they say, that this idea of wisdom, earthly wisdom, is you do what's good for you. You do what's best for you. We see this idea of folks who have fallen out of love with each other, right? We look at celebrities, actors and actresses that have been married 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times, right? And the response is, well, I no longer felt love for that person, right? It wasn't good for me anymore, and so I needed to get out of that relationship because it wasn't good for me. That's the same idea of bitter envy and selfish ambition, that it's not promoting what I need, what I want, what I can get out of it. This idea of bitter envy is looking at a situation, looking at a relationship, looking at other people, and using them for what I can get out of it, what is good for me. This is the lie that has always existed in relation to sin. If you go all the way back to Genesis chapter 3, do you remember what Satan said to Eve? He said, well, surely you won't die. God knows that you won't die. In fact, it's worse than that. God knows that when you eat of this fruit, you're going to become like him. That you're going to know what's the difference between good and evil. God is afraid that if you eat this fruit, then all of a sudden you're going to become like him. You're not going to die. You need that. That's good for you. You need that. And so the lie that Eve believed is, that fruit is good for me. Why is God holding out on me? Why would he not want me to have these good things? Why would he not want me to be like him? When God made her in his image. That the only creation on earth that was made in God's image was mankind. She was like him. And yet the lie that she believed was that God was holding out on her. That he didn't want her to be like him. And so she took and she ate. And she gave it to her husband. And he took and he ate because he wanted that wisdom. That they looked at God, and in their earthly wisdom, in this demonic wisdom, in this unspiritual wisdom, they decided, I know what's best for me. I'm going to do what's best for me, and nobody's going to tell me what to do. And so what James says is that is unspiritual. The lie that we're told in life is to follow your heart, to do what your heart says. You know what the Bible says about your heart? In Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9, it says, the heart is more deceitful than anything else, and incurable. Who can understand it? The lie, the earthly wisdom to follow your heart, is the opposite of what the Bible has commanded us to do. The Bible says that your heart is the last thing that you should follow. That your feelings, they change with the wind. That your emotions are subject and circumstantial. To follow your heart is the furthest thing from what the Bible teaches. And James calls that wisdom earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. That word unspiritual actually was interesting to me because what that means, what he's actually saying is it is dead. It has no spirit. That kind of wisdom is a dead kind of wisdom. That when we practice this wisdom that is full of bitter envy and selfish ambition, that it's not going to lead anywhere. It is a dead type of wisdom. That when we practice that, we're not doing good things, we're not practicing good things, we're not getting good things out, that we're walking opposite of the plan that God has for us. And so if earthly wisdom is self-seeking, then what kind of wisdom is heavenly wisdom? Heavenly wisdom seeks peace. Heavenly wisdom seeks peace. Verse 17, but the wisdom from above is first pure, and then peace-loving, gentle, compliant, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering, without pretense. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who cultivate peace. The wisdom that comes from God seeks peace. It's not self-seeking like the earthly wisdom. It seeks peace on behalf of all other people. And this wisdom is not some sort of ethereal wisdom that you have to just kind of come by osmosis. In chapter 1, verse 5, James says, if any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives all generously and without criticizing, and it will be given to him. Heavenly wisdom comes from God, and it's freely given. All you've got to do is ask. So in looking at relationships, if wisdom is demonstrated by our character, and I'm looking at my character and I want to be a believer who is a peace-seeking person, then how do I get that wisdom? I just pray that God would give it to me. That God's Spirit would come and guide my words, guide my thoughts, guide my actions. That I would be a person that seeks peace. And James says that the fruit of our wisdom is sevenfold. He says that it's pure. Another way of thinking about that is that it's innocent, that it's not, it doesn't have any ulterior motives, right? It's the way that a child would come to you without any ulterior motives, that it's pure. There's no selfishness. That it's peace-loving. An English definition of this idea of peace-loving is that it's free from anxiety. It's free from worry. That the wisdom of God is peace-loving. It's promoting peace. It says it's gentle or considerate. That it's considerate of other people's needs and what I can do to benefit other people. The fruit of this wisdom is gentle. It is compliant. That could be translated easily persuaded, submissive, open-minded, willing to yield, reasonable, open to reason. I think the idea there is more of empathetic. That it looks to see the needs and hurts of other people and looks to cultivate peace in that relationship. That it is compliant, that it's full of mercy and good fruits, that it's unwavering. Unwavering can be impartial, not prejudiced, without variance, straightforward. There's no ulterior motive here. That it's without pretense, that it's genuine, sincere, without hypocrisy. When you ascribe to the wisdom of heaven, these are the evidences that appear in your life. That wisdom is displayed by our conduct. If you want to check yourself and you want to see what kind of wisdom you're practicing, am I practicing earthly wisdom? Am I practicing heavenly wisdom? Then what are the evidences in the way that you relate to other people? Are you one that has these 7 fruits? Pure, peace-loving, gentle, compliant, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering, without pretense? Or is there selfish ambition that's creeping into your life? Is there bitter envy that's creeping into your life? I've known people that have done really, really good things for other people with ulterior motives. That it benefits them, even though that they're doing good things and they're distributing food and clothes and all of these things, and they're doing good things to other people, and yet they're doing it for the selfish ambition of their own heart, what they get out of it. That I can then point at those works and say, look at how good I am. Look at the good things that I'm doing. See all of these people? That's selfish ambition. What you're doing is you're drawing that. You're not doing it for the good of other people. You're doing it so that other people will see what I can get out of it. Don't you see how great I am because I'm helping these poor, these orphans, these widows? That's exactly what the Bible calls us to do, to look after widows and orphans in their distress. That's what James says pure religion is. Caring for widows and orphans in their distress. And yet if I'm doing that with bitter envy and selfish ambition in my heart, then that's earthly wisdom, that's not heavenly wisdom. Our wisdom is displayed in our conduct, and heavenly wisdom seeks peace. Look at verse 18. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who cultivate peace. That idea of cultivating peace makes me think of a farmer in a field. That guy didn't just grow wheat by sitting at home, right? He had to go out into the field and he had to plow up the field. And then he had to come back with his seed and he had to plant the seed. And then he had to come back and water it. And then he had to come back and weed it. And then he could have wheat after that. My granddad is a tree farmer. I'm part tree farmer. I don't know if you know that. Being a tree farmer is terrible work. We have to go out and we have to dig. Well, every single time we go to the farm, we have a plow. And every single time we go out to the farm, the plow breaks. I don't know how it works. We get it fixed every time, and every single time it breaks within the first row of trees. And so I end up digging trees. Cultivating trees is hard work. It doesn't just happen. And what James says is that the righteousness of God is sown by those who are cultivating peace. That if we want to be people who practice heavenly wisdom, then we've got to work at that. We've got to cultivate that. We have to be a people who sow peace. Do you know what Jesus says in Matthew 5? He says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God." The people who are sons of God are the ones who are peacemakers. Peace just doesn't happen. We live in a world full of earthly wisdom. We live in a world full of bitter envy and selfish ambition. That the world is constantly trying to get up, constantly trying to get ahead. If any of you work corporately at all, you understand the cutthroat nature of the world that we live in. That if anybody can do anything to step on you or over you, then that's the goal. I'm trying to promote myself. I'm trying to get myself up and over, right? That's bitter envy and selfish ambition. That's earthly wisdom. But heavenly wisdom seeks peace. It's not self-seeking. It seeks peace. And so the children of God, believers in Jesus, are called to be people who cultivate peace, who sow peace. That when we practice heavenly wisdom, the evidence in our life is that we're going to be a people who practice peace with all people. Do you know that he notes this indiscriminately? That you're to be a peace seeker. That you're to bring other people to Jesus. Let Jesus fix the problem in other people's lives. That's not my job. My job is to point you to the one that can fix you. And my job is to be a peace bringer, a sower of peace. Someone who's going to cultivate peace. And so what we see today, three things. We see wisdom is evident in our conduct. If you want to understand the wisdom that you're practicing, just look at the fruit in your life. Wisdom is evident in our conduct. Earthly wisdom is self-seeking, but heavenly wisdom seeks peace.